While the Discoverability Network is fortunate to have some great partners, we are equally fortunate to have some excellent speakers here today. So it is now my honor to introduce our speakers for a panel discussion on approaches to inclusion and strategies to build an inclusive business. To begin with, I would like to introduce our panel facilitator, Pam Damoff, Member of Parliament, Oakville-Burlington North, or Oakville North Burlington, I should get that correct. Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety. Pam was first elected as the Member of Parliament for Oakville North Burlington in 2015. Following the 2021 federal election, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau appointed Pam Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety. Pam has been a member of the Public Safety and National Security Committee since 2016 and is a proven advocate for criminal justice reform. She was instrumental in tabling a report on the pervasive nature of systemic racism in policing that concluded a transformative national effort is required to ensure that all Black, Indigenous, and racialized people in Canada are not subject to discrimination in our criminal justice system. And she worked with the Public Safety Committee to table Bill C-71, Common Sense Firearms Legislation. Pam previously served as Parliamentary Secretary to Indigenous Services and Health and as Vice Chair of the Status of Women Committee. A proud recipient of the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal and the Paul Harris Fellow recognition from Rotary International, Pam is an advocate for active transportation and chair of the Oakville Terry Fox Run. In 2019, Ms. Damoff was instrumental in securing $150 million in federal funding in the budget 2019 to support the Marathon of Hope Cancer Center Network. Next, I would like to introduce Justine Fedak, who is a self-declared corporate hippie. She is Chief Marketing Officer of Merge, an agency that partners with clients to promote health, wealth, and happiness. She was the former Chief Brand Strategist, Polara Strategic Insights, and a long-time senior executive with BMO for over 20 years. Justine is a very active member of her community and industry. She is a member of the board of directors of the Magnificent Mile Association and the Chicago Police Foundation. She is Special Service Area Commissioner, SSA number 16, City of Chicago, Greektown, Chair of Chicago-Toronto Sister Cities, World Business Chicago, as well as a past member of many other prominent boards in Canada and the United States. She is the National Multiple Sclerosis Society's 2013 Woman on the Move, a Dalhousie University Lifetime Achievement 2015 recipient, Chicago Business Journal's 2015 Women of Influence, Chicago Sky's 2016 Redefine Possible Women's Leadership Award recipient, and the 2017 Cone Whale Memorial MS honoree. Justine was recently featured in CS Magazine as Chicago favorite Women of Inspiration and Style and is the Eversight Woman of Vision 2021. Continuing with our panelists, I would like to introduce Ryan Porter, who is the founder and CEO of Rootly. For the past 8 years, Ryan has lived and breathed job postings. Rootly was founded to address the glaring gaps in the way that employers communicate employment opportunities through job postings. Companies like Johnson & Johnson, Siemens, GlaxoSmithKline, Indigo, Coach Hub, and more have relied on Rootly to tell their employer brand story where it matters most, directly in their job postings. When he's not running his company, he's deer watching in his backyard on the East Coast with his wife and 3-year-old daughter and counting down the days until world travel gets back to normal. Last but certainly not least, I want to introduce Mark Patterson, who is the Executive Director of Magnet Today. Mark is a change maker pioneering new approaches in career development, inclusive recruitment, and contextualized labor market information to drive social and economic change. For more than a decade, he has focused on providing opportunities for diverse job seekers and addressing the needs of employers. As executive director, Mark leads Magnet, a technology-enabled social innovation project based in the Toronto Metropolitan University. A first of its kind in North America, Magnet harnesses intelligent matching technology, data, and analytics to effectively connect people, businesses, and organizations to opportunity, with the goal of helping regions and communities collaborate and grow. Magnet provides the digital infrastructure for Canada's Future Skills Centre, a forward-thinking research centre with a focus on how to best prepare Canadians today for workforce opportunities in the future. Mark serves on the following advisory boards: founding member of the Future Skills Centre Advisory Board, National Stakeholder Advisory for the Labour Market Information Council, advisory board member on the Employers Partnership Table in support of Ontario's employment strategy for people with disabilities. Now that we have our speakers, MP Damoff, I leave the facilitation of this conversation in your capable hands.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for the introductions, and to all our panelists. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. I'm going to start with you, Ryan. One of the things that I know I hear from businesses all the time is, well, I would hire people if they only applied. Why is the traditional method of writing job postings ineffective?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I love that the word writing is in there, because I think that actually one of the big problems is that people aren't writing job postings. They're control C'ing and control V'ing job postings. They're copying and pasting them, or they're selecting them from a drop down in an ATS from a list of templates. And the biggest problem with that is that it assumes that you got it 100% right the last time that you used it, and the time before that, and the time before that, dating back to probably 1998 when it was first drafted, right, on a Windows 95 machine. And I kind of say that as a joke, but if we're really looking at the most ineffective piece about writing job postings, I believe that it is we leave far too much to candidate interpretation. And candidate interpretation, in my opinion, is the biggest threat to the applicant pool and recruiters' time. And so, you had mentioned that we just don't get enough people applying. And if we look at the job posting, it has words like communication skills, presentation skills, right, teamwork skills. But to different people, those terms mean different things. And so, I'll just give one example before I kind of bring this answer to a close. Is imagine a person who is deaf or hard of hearing, and they're looking at a job posting that says communication skills. And so they see that term and they start going through their experiences, right? Do I have communication skills? In these situations, maybe I do. In these situations, maybe I don't. Now, what if that job's communication skills actually involved answering customer service emails and handwriting thank you cards, right? If we don't put that context in the job posting, that candidate is probably going to opt out of that experience and say, I don't have the communication skills for this position. They'll never apply. And then we get the employers going, well, no one's applying to our positions. And so what I always recommend, introduce the word if and scrap the skills. And what I mean by that is when you're writing a job posting, if you were doing this job for this company at this moment in time, here's exactly what you would have done today. Here's exactly what we would have expected from you. Here are the technologies that you would have used, and here are the outcomes that we would expect you to achieve. Because then it becomes much easier for a candidate to go, can I answer some customer service emails and handwrite thank you cards, as opposed to, do I have communication skills?
That's great. And Mark, it's a good segue over to you in terms of technology-based recruitment practices. One of the things I've noticed is a lot of companies filter people through, a computer application that, maybe they get 200 applicants. And if it meets certain qualifications in that technology, then it gets sent off to someone else. How can we make that whole recruitment practice more accessible?
Yeah, so first of all, I completely agree with everything that Ryan just mentioned. You need to make your posting real to the individuals, and they need to be able to relate to it. So really agree with all of what he said. Technology, it's always been a challenge to get your posting or your application flagged as a high potential candidate. So a lot of, especially larger companies, do use keyword searches and so on. You would be surprised though, a lot of recruiters depend on them less than you might think. So they'll often go back and scan through a lot of the applications. So, and I think it's just as important, as Ryan was speaking about the job posting that an employer is making, that somebody that's applying to a job also is reflecting on what they want to do, how they can bring their whole self to that role, how they relate to the job. So it's kind of, there's two sides to this coin. often people, when they're doing applications or writing a resume, they're not thinking about how all of their previous experiences relate to what that employer is looking for. And so if both sides actually meet, if you can have the employer doing a posting that really articulates what the job is about, and the individual articulating how they can meet that in the application, it's a lot easier for the recruiters. Technology, though, is becoming more predominant as we have a massive kind of proliferation of new jobs being developed all the time. There's not only screening technology on the employer side to help them, go through hundreds of applications or thousands of applications in some cases, but there are also career pathing and other tools that job seekers are now going through. And I guess I would just say use them with, they're valuable, they're useful, but they're also not perfect yet. I reflect back when I was in maybe grade 10, 9 or 10, I remember doing a bubble sheet where you filled it out and it told you what you should be for the rest of your life. I think mine was short order cook, which didn't really work out. They're helpful, they'll open your eyes, but take them kind of with a grain of salt, because the algorithms and the matching and all of those things are just that. They're just a guide. So I think the key message would be also learn, become more self-aware, understand what you like, how you can bring your whole self to the job and be able to articulate that in your application, and look for employers that will do the same on the other side as well.
On that, and this wasn't in the questions that you were sent, but you just got me thinking about something, is a lot of people who are living with disabilities don't have work experience at the same age. So you might have a 30-year-old that has never actually had a paid job. I know a woman right now who's just been trying to work as an ECE. So as an employer, how do we make sure that employers are looking at applications with that recognition that the entering the job force for that person has been more challenging, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to be a good employee? And how do we, maybe Ryan, I could start with you just in terms of the actual application process, and then I'll get everybody to jump in if you want to. Like how can you make that application process such that it is accessible for people who have had a challenge finding paid employment?
Yeah, so context is everything, right? Like the employer is trying to find somebody who can do a particular job in a particular organization in a particular time. And so without context, the candidates can't judge whether or not they're able to do something. And so it really requires employers to be very honest with themselves about what the job actually requires from like a task, a technology, and outcome standpoint. And if they can be honest with themselves about that, they can be honest with candidates about that. And then candidates can gauge whether or not they can do that job. So like I said, like eliminate every arbitrary, vague, blanket term that you have in your job posting and replace them with if statements, and be very specific about what a person should be able to do with that job. And then also eliminate the words would be an asset. I see this so often in job postings where it's like, and speaking 9 other languages would be an asset. Oh, thank you for that. Do you think the candidates don't know that speaking multiple languages might be an asset to an organization? So eliminate that kind of language and stick to what the job actually requires, because then we'll actually open the doors to a more diverse candidate pool and start getting people who will actually be able to do those jobs, right? So I think context is everything.
Did anybody else, Justine or Mark, want to jump in on that? And then I've got a question for you, Justine.
Sure. I mean, I think the first time Ryan and I met and he started talking about this, it really touched me, because I do think, as somebody that has been hired, and in fact, the title that Donald had is slightly out of date for me, because I didn't feel I was a fit in the different job that I had. And now I'm actually the chief marketing officer for a club that's about social wellness. And one of the things that I shared with them, Ryan, in the hiring that we just did for a new director of operations, was the messaging that you talked about, because a lot of these very technical things often overtake really what the job entails. And so I think that that's something that we all, even more outside of our disability related community, it's something that we all need to get better at, because as you're saying, Pam, people are not getting the opportunities sometimes, and yet they have a skill set that's totally applicable, totally transferable. And what they have that never makes it into any of these job postings is heart. I mean, if you could say, and what is your emotional commitment? How badly do you want this job? And I do think that's something that in our community, where sometimes inclusiveness makes us feel that we're not as valued of a candidate. In fact, we may be even more valued because the skills we have been finer tuned in certain areas that others may not have focused on. So I think that that's something I look forward to as we continue the panel learning about and sharing.
Justine, one of the things I did want to ask you, and you sort of touched on that, is like authenticity in the workplace. How does that facilitate greater productivity with the workforce that you have working for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big word, authenticity. And sometimes I find that people probably smile a bit and say, oh, sure, I'm bringing my authentic self to work every day. And I certainly did not bring my authentic self to work for many years after my multiple sclerosis diagnosis, because I didn't want to be that person that everybody pointed to, and I didn't want to be looked at as maybe not as capable. So that was inside of me. So when I talk now about authenticity, what I'm really trying to share is this notion that when you're comfortable with yourself, it took me integrating my disability into my everyday life, into my own recognition of how it made me feel, into listening for actually the positive reinforcement I was getting from people like the former CEO of BMO, Bill Down, who said to me, Justine, you feel different. Your work product is no different. The only thing that's different about you is how you're looking at yourself. Now, in my case, I was not born with this disability, so it was an adjustment to a new reality. But in the communities that I speak to and I learn from, what I'd say is authenticity really starts inside of you. And so if people are offering you the opportunity and they're saying this, then I do believe you have to give yourself a chance to look inside and say, so what does that mean to me? And gauge your comfort level. So for me, I became so comfortable that I'm here today having this conversation. And there's absolutely nobody that does not know I have multiple sclerosis. Do I sometimes still have moments of, I wonder if I will be judged about this, or they'll worry that maybe I'll have an exacerbation, or I'm not as capable to handle stress or pressures, or some of the things that are personal to me. So I really feel that it does start with us as individuals and our own personal integration. And that's where the authenticity for me is born.
How can an employer sort of cultivate that within the workplace, though? I mean, it could start with you, but if your employer isn't supportive,
yeah. Well, I mean, that's a big question. If your employer is not supportive, that's a challenge. There's no question. But you do have other avenues within organizations. Now, many organizations are supportive, maybe not to the degree that somebody feels as comfortable, but I do think that curiosity from employers, that sense of, I really don't know about this. I don't know what this means. And certainly, even when I'm speaking about disability, I mean, I know my own disability. I am not an authority on anyone else's MS journey or on anyone else's personal experiences. So we can only speak from our own experience, no matter who we are and what we're dealing with in life, but there's commonality and intersection. So I think the openness and curiosity that reduces judgment, and that goes for everybody. So I think employers that are talking about certain things are already starting down the right path. By having certain policies, you're setting at least objectives. Now, a policy is not a culture. So culture is built by the people that work there. And so I do think it's important for people to share with one another and create, whether it's employee resource groups or just informal groups for openness. And I think, Ryan, you often talk about that synergy that happens when people are collaborating. So I do think that part of this is also finding a fit. So the job I'm no longer with, I said to Donald, there's a reason I'm no longer there. it was not a fit for me on a variety of levels. So our own values have to come into play. And I think that's also important to think that we have values, and that's our authenticity, and the workplace needs to match that. And sometimes it's not congruent. So that incongruence also might mean you're not the right person. Now, the short order cook job, I'm sorry that you didn't pursue, because I also have taken those tests, and the things they told me sounded like I should be in a military role as an assassin. So I definitely did not go down that route either. I think it's finding fit.
Yeah. Mark, in terms of finding fit, like what are Magnet and the Discoverability Network doing to connect businesses to qualified talent, of people living with a disability?
Yeah, well, one of it kind of came up earlier, there's this whole job posting kind of side, but there's also a large network of organizations doing amazing work in communities across Ontario, across Canada. In fact, thousands, right? So if you take just the post-secondary institutions in Ontario alone, there are 45, many with multiple career centers and offices to support students. You have Employment Ontario. We had a guest on in one of the videos. There are over 358 providers of Employment Ontario, with many locations. So if you took Ontario alone, just in what we call the publicly funded employment and training system to help people transition, there are probably 1,000 plus organizations and communities across Ontario that are working directly with people and supporting them, but employers have a hard time navigating kind of that, a hard time making the connection. So organizations like the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, through the Discoverability Project and so on, helping to bridge that gap between where talent exists and is being supported, and the employers that need that talent, and also to help remove some of the myths of that employers hold, right, about hiring somebody that might be different than their usual hire, is really important. And so we've worked on a number of things. We now have, so many of these organizations have their own job board that only the employers that know about them know about the job board. So what we've done is actually in the background, we've connected all of these systems together, created a way to connect them together so an employer can create a great posting with Ryan's support and also post it through to these networks and organizations that are actually supporting people on the ground. So that's one way, kind of reducing the fragmentation and looking at the system and trying to help employers navigate that.
So, I mean, we had the people that are on this or have joined us today are ones that have already discovered that they want to hire people living with a disability, right? But when you talk about all these, organizations across Ontario alone that are doing really good work, you mentioned the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, but where is that disconnect between? I mean, we all keep hearing it. I can't find people. I can't find people. There's nobody applying. I can't find people for the job. There's a labor shortage. And then you say, well, are you looking in the right places? And those places exist. And maybe this question isn't so much for the people who are here, but how do they spread the word to others? How do we get more people to be part of this network where they can find the talent that they're looking for?
Yeah, so there are a number of things that I would touch on that are kind of packed in that. We know that employment outcomes, for example, for persons with disabilities are certainly not at the level that they should be, nowhere close. And there are a number of things. One, if people have, for example, been rejected, doesn't matter who you are or what your background is, if you've been rejected over and over again, there's a ability to keep yourself motivated, to keep yourself in the labor market, to keep yourself looking. If you're 30 years old, you've graduated, you have 2 master's degrees, as the person you mentioned, I know several as well, and you haven't been able to connect to a job, that would be very demotivating. One of the things I would challenge any of the employers on the call is to commit to hiring. Just do it. you'll find out that it's amazing. We practice what we preach, and we often go out and hire people that are in that situation that haven't been given a chance. And I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised. But even more importantly, try to make sure you're focusing on giving opportunities to youth when they're in high school, when they're in post-secondary, and earlier on, so that they have the experiences, they learn and get to experience. So commit to that as an employer, to work with, you know, high schools and other organizations to intentionally hire people that might get overlooked or might not be given an opportunity. That's what I would challenge the employers on the call to do.
Well, and I think any employer to whom I've spoken who has hired someone living with a disability, it ends up being one of what turns into many, because it's such a good experience that they have, that one person broke the barrier. And then the employer says, oh, I'd like more people like this. I've got a great employee. It's good for my other employees. It's good for my bottom line. Like all of the benefits that we talk about, it's getting that employer to hire that one person, and then then the floodgates can open. Ryan, I wonder if you could give us some examples of businesses that have adopted your recommendations and what kind of benefits they've experienced.
Sure, absolutely. So a couple of things. I probably won't mention employers by name.
That's fine.
But I will talk about a few things that have been implemented. So, I spend a lot of my time in job posting world, right? That's what I live and breathe, optimizing job postings, telling employer brand stories through job postings. Now, aside from that, I'll talk about that in a second from the job posting perspective. But one of the most important things that I've seen employers implement is, to piggyback a little bit on what Mark was just talking about, is outbound strategy. Right. I think a lot of employers have it really twisted around like, my DE&I strategy is right there. It's a paragraph in my job posting. Like, check it out. This is us. We're really doing this, aren't we? But when you ask those employers, like, what's your outbound strategy? And a lot of them are just kind of scratching their head, like, what do you mean outbound strategy? And to Mark's point, it's actively, and Pam, you just mentioned this as well, actively going and finding places and community allies that can help you get exposure to these groups that you might not be aware of, and connecting with the industry experts that can put you and your outbound strategy in front of diverse groups of people. And so I think, eliminating the idea that a DE&I strategy is a paragraph in a job posting or a LinkedIn posting that says, hey, look at us. I think that it's really implementing an outbound strategy. And if you don't have one, being very honest with your organization about that and seeking out the experts that can help you, develop an outbound strategy. Now, in terms of like specific strengths or specific wins that we've seen companies have. So just a little bit of background, this isn't pitching my company, but what we do is we make job postings visual. Right? We make these visual pieces, interactive pieces that live inside of job postings at scale in any language in any country in the world. And when we see companies find compelling ways to visually show and tell their employer brand story, we start seeing some really unique things happen with their candidate pool. We see it start expanding. Right? We start tracking metrics and seeing that people spend double and triple the amount of time on a job posting, which is critical for candidates understanding a role. We see conversion rates in terms of application completion ratios go through the roof. So increase, 110% for some employers, simply by visually showing and telling that they're walking the walk, showing diverse candidates and allowing them to share their stories and give an alternative way to ingest or digest a job posting, right? Because since 1996, when they came online, job postings have only been text. And there are multiple ways to show and tell diverse stories within a job posting. And it's critical, right? Like that's so critical and so much more important than your last paragraph in a job posting being, hey, we hire diverse people.
Well, I can remember years ago, Shopify testifying at the Status of Women Committee, and it was they weren't getting women applying for their jobs. And so they had someone review the job posting and changed some of the words in there. And by changing those words, they ended up with 50-50 women and men. Like it was as simple as just changing the wording that was in the job posting. So I remember doing another panel, and I think it was Mark Wafer said, just putting in your door when you're saying, help wanted, we are an inclusive employer. all of a sudden you've sent a different message to those people that walk by the sign. So just changing the words. And have you seen success with the employers that you've worked with then, Ryan, in terms of who's applying?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. So aside from like the visual storytelling component of it, like the very bare minimum that you like, there are free tools out there, gender decoders, that you can run your job posting through to make sure that it's not skewing one way or the other. Right. If you're still an employer that's calling, your job posting titles, sales guru, sales rock star, like get rid of that. That doesn't help anybody. And what that does is results in the less diverse candidate or applicant pool, right? So by very bare minimum, use the free gender decoders and run it through there to make sure that you're not skewing heavily one way or the other. And then there are, more advanced tools like Textio that you can connect with to make sure that you're actually wording your job postings in an appropriate way to attract a more diverse candidate pool. There's no silver bullet with this, right? And I think, a little bit earlier, Justine had talked about this, but it really can start with the people on this call raising their hand going, why do we do it this way? Why haven't we tried these things? Why are we using this language? When was the last time we revisited this part of our recruitment strategy? And just starting the dialogue and being very honest around what you can and can't do well, what you have done well, what you haven't done well, and where there are some glaring blind spots for your organization, because then you can really start to put together that stack of tools and expertise and consultants that can help you really start to expand that candidate pool.
That's so true. Justine, you talked about how you went from not living with a disability to getting MS, and then and that's, this is, I've heard this repeatedly from people who, I remember clearly one man who went deaf, and all of a sudden had to have his whole workplace had to change. How important is it for employers to make sure that they've built an environment where employees are comfortable advocating for themselves? So and particularly if they're in a not only a situation where your life circumstance may change, but also where you've been hired in a company, and how important it is, and how can the employer make sure that people working in the company can advocate for themselves?
Well, I think that it's a bigger topic than even just the inclusiveness of peoples with disabilities. I think that it does come down to ensuring that the environment itself is open to the fact that everyone's going to have accommodations of some sort. We all have life changes, and to simply isolate, the disability community as the only community that has these issues to wrestle with, it's sort of inappropriate. I think in a world like we live in, we all have things that are quote unquote accommodations, and we all have stressors in our lives. I mean, right now it appears my Wi-Fi is choosing to buffer and it's freaking me out, so I apologize to everybody, but these are the kinds of things we cannot predict. So MS really taught me that it's a very unpredictable, random. We don't know why these things are going to happen. And so therefore we all have that. So I think that the sensitivity to those people that may be going through any kind of diagnosis of any sort of disability, whether it's physical, mental, anything that touches our community, there is a deep importance to understanding that accommodation is not a negative word. Accommodation is allowing your workforce to be its most productive, allowing your employees to be their most connected, giving people the opportunity to develop. It's very disturbing to me when people give someone feedback and they say, I don't think they're going to make it. How can they not make it if you're giving them all the support? If their will is not there, it's one thing, but when you see that people have the will, they wish to be part of a certain community, then that's true diversity. So diversity is who we bring in. Inclusion is how we allow them to be their best. So for me, it's the culture of enabling people. So there are times where I cannot walk very well at all. So if my job required me to only walk, I would not be the right fit. But if there are things that enable me to be just as productive, then I should be given that accommodation so that those gifts, talents, skills, or hopes and dreams that I have can be realized the same. So I think many environments, and certainly the province of Ontario, are leaders in this regard of opening up the dialogue. So the first thing too is if you don't understand something about someone else that is slightly different from yourself, you don't know what their accommodation is, find a way to ask that's comfortable for both of you. But I think that accommodation sometimes for employers sounds like money, when really it's enabling your employee to be their best. And it doesn't mean just, doors that can open. It's all kinds of things that we need to embrace to create a truly inclusive workplace.
Well, and there's often, as you know, a perception that those accommodations are going to cost me too much money, and so therefore I can't accommodate without even looking into it in the first place. And as you said, a lot of those accommodations, they're not financial. It might be flex hours. It might be,
Exactly.
things that I think I read that the average cost of accommodation is less than $500. So we're not talking about, I see lots of heads shaking there, but we're not talking about a lot of money, especially with the dedication and productivity that you're getting from that employee that you've hired. That $500 is money well spent. And oftentimes too, those accommodations are not only good for that person that you're making them for, they're actually good for every single employee in your company. So, when you look at those accommodations and you realize that, my gosh, maybe we should have been doing this for everybody all along. So it creates a far more productive and happy, quite frankly, workplace when their employer is listening. I think we've only got about 5 minutes left. I'm not sure, but I was going to mark out, you had talked about, the connecting businesses. Why create that job matching platform for businesses to connect with the demographic of people living with disabilities? Why is it important to have that platform? And you're on mute, Mark. I was waiting to say that today.
You caught me. Well, for us, it was just really important to make it easier for, we all hear about people without jobs and jobs without people. It just doesn't seem to make sense, right? So there has to be some kind of friction or some disconnect in the system where employers aren't able. And as I mentioned before, one of the things that we identified was just the sheer number of organizations and separate siloed job boards and so on that just employers weren't able to navigate. Like, just as an example, if you wanted to hire a post-secondary student and you know about Waterloo and Dalhousie, you still have to do 2 separate postings. Like, are you going to do it at 50 schools? Maybe they're not there. Maybe the term's not right. So how do we make it easier? It was really about that. And when you get into the sheer number of organizations in the broader, publicly funded employment and training system, that becomes even more important. So for us, that was one of the key elements. And then technology is never enough. Technology is just a piece. Then you need organizations and teams like Donald and Lisa at Discoverability and so on, doing work on the ground with people, helping navigate that, build relationships and so on. So, but it takes a bunch of these different components to bring the system together to help people find meaningful jobs. We heard earlier, I firmly believe that employment is one of the key things, the base kind of layers of mental health and self-actualization and so on, to have a meaningful where you're giving back and something to contribute. So for us, it was just really important to try to be a positive change in the system, to remove some of this fragmentation. And we're lucky to have partners to work with, like Discoverability and the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. And I hope more organizations come together to realize that this is just good for Canada, for the society we want to live in as well, that we care about things like this.
Well, I remember having a conversation one time. It was about voting, but it was a young woman who I had done one for people living with disabilities. And one young woman said to me, the 2 biggest issues for her were employment and housing. And they're so closely tied, right? Without employment, you can't get housing. And so having that independence was so important to her, to be able to to be able to have to have the employment, to have her own housing, and to live an independent, fulfilling life. So I guess Ryan, and maybe I'll throw this out to all of you if you have a response, but once you've done that job posting, do you have any recommendations for the employer and how the interview process goes? So is there anything that you should be doing that maybe you're not doing right now when you're actually interviewing these candidates? And Ryan, if you don't want to jump in, I'll maybe see if Mark or Justine do as well.
No, I'm happy to jump in here. So I think the recruitment process in general forces a bunch of people to be things that they're not. Right. So you've got recruiters being forced to be copywriters and hiring managers being forced to be some, an interviewer. And I know that's part of their job. But what happens is an organization hands a lot of times a hiring manager or the interviewer this kind of like, here are the questions that we use for this role. And then what happens is it becomes a job to be done by the interviewer. Right. Here are the things that I need to check off to make sure that I've done this interview the way that my organization wants me to do it. And they completely overlook the like building connection piece, diving a little bit deeper with the individual to understand what really motivates them, what gets them up in the morning, what kind of problems they'd be excited to be working on. These kinds of things are often overlooked on a systematic level because we're so worried about the interview. Right. And yes, we need to make sure that they can do certain things for that role will require. And yes, we need to, check off a few of those boxes, but we need to make a connection, right? We need to understand this person, what they want to do and what they want to accomplish if they were given this opportunity, and then what they can bring to this organization. It needs to be this two-way connection building piece, as opposed to just like, let me run you through this and see if you give the right answers. And so I think, yes, that needs to be done, but more importantly, like, what's the connection here? What can we offer each other? And can we move forward in the same direction together?
Yeah, and I think, I think of two of the best employees I've ever hired. Well, most of them, it was because of that connection, not because of the skills. So it was, the interest that they had and making that connection over, okay, that person's pretty cool. They've done this, and oh, she's a drummer in her spare time. That's kind of cool. Maybe we should hire her. It wasn't because she ticked all of the boxes. And I think you're right. Justine or Mark, did you want to weigh in on that at all?
It's interesting. I'm actually in 2 minutes doing an interview.
Well, there you go.
Unfortunately, I know there are, for example, in some cases, there are restrictions. We're, for example, in a unionized environment. And so there are certain restrictions, but I couldn't agree more. Like, I think the core thing is give space. Even if you're in a structured interview, give space for people to ask real questions, for you to share authentically about, what the role is. So even if you're in a structured environment, you can do that, and try to make that connection, because at the end of the day, an hour or 45-minute interview and, could lead to many years of working together and with your team. It's a very important process. Often we don't take enough time in being proactive about where we look for talent, how we reach out to different talent pools, how we take time and spend time on the process. We're often in a big rush just to fill the spot. And I think just more thoughtfulness around the whole process is really important. I found myself, we've hired over 100 people this year, I think, but just trying to slow down a little more and take time to get the right team, and make sure that it's a team that can work together, that can, grow together, can share together. And that takes exactly what Ryan was saying, like more authenticity, time and space in the process overall than a lot of us.
Authenticity leads really well. Justine, I'm getting a note that we have to wrap up, but since we're talking about authenticity, I think that gives you, we'll give the final word over to you.
All right, well, I'm going to wrap it very, very quickly to say that I think that, I live by a motto that's actually Jack Kerouac. And for those of you that don't know Jack Kerouac, he wrote On the Road in a sort of on a psychedelic trip, he wrote a book. And so you can sort of say, wow, we're not going to listen to anything this lady has to say, if that's where she gets her life's motto, but it's be in love with your life every single minute. So when you are in an interview, when you are in a job, when you're not getting the job, you do get the job, you get feedback, being in love with your life, whatever that life is, I think enables you to approach all these situations with much more authenticity.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you to all of you, Ryan, Mark, Justine. This has been amazing. Thank you for everything that you're doing to advance the goals of getting more employers hiring. And I'll turn it back to whoever I'm turning it back to.
That would be me. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Justine. And thank you, Mark. That was an excellent conversation. Justine, I don't think you have to worry about invoking Jack Kerouac and On the Road. That is such a popular book. I'm sure people are happy to learn from its wisdom and insights. That conversation highlighted so many things. I think the importance of clear language and context being critical to soliciting the right candidates, as well as employees being comfortable with themselves and in an environment that encourages authenticity, are positive contributors to productivity, are important takeaways, as well as places like Magnet and discoverability existing to facilitate effective connections and fostering such processes.